Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. If I can bring this meeting to order, thank you very much. Welcome to this Budget and Finance Committee for Halloween, October 31st, 2016. Happy Halloween, everyone. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, joined by my colleagues, Mr. Englander and Mr. Blumenfield. Mr. Williams, are there any cards?
No, sir, there are no cards.
General public comment is now closed, and comment on items 1 through 7 is also closed. Members, I would propose items 4 through 7 for consent approval without objection. Seeing no objection, those matters, 4, 6, and 7 are approved on consent. And on item 5, members, I would ask that we approve that item with the addition that we request that the CAO and the Office of Finance also report on those proposals. If there's no objection.
Yeah, I might have a question on that one, but that's right. Go ahead.
Okay, that will be the action of the committee. That brings us then to item number 3, the FSR, and as is our tradition, members, we'll go ahead and take the FSR departmental roll call and see what matters we wish to ask department-specific questions about. Mr. Blumenfield?
For me, City Attorney and Department of Transportation.
City Attorney and DOT. I will add personnel. Mr. Englander?
Just CAO, so no departments, no. We're good.
Okay. All right. If you are not here with the City Attorney's Office, DOT, personnel, or the CAO, or of course the CLA, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming down. See you next time.
You're not going to go for the police when they
I did
I know the answer, and I know what it is. I can go to the theater.
yeah.
And folks from all the other departments, I know you're excited to be able to get back to the office, but if you could exit silently, please, so we can get back to work, that would be great.
So if they don't, we'll call it back.
Thank you. Yeah. If I don't have silence, your department will be called back in for further questioning. All right, let's go ahead and bring up the CAO, please, on item number 3. Mr. Santana, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As is customary, we issued our first FSR. We start off with informing.
Sorry, Mr. Santana. I'm sorry, folks, but I was serious. I need to have silence in here so we can concentrate on the testimony that's being offered. Please, if you can't be silent, you got to leave. Mr. Santana.
Sure. As it's customary, we issued our first FSR. We start off providing you an update on upgrades that we recently received from 2 of our bond rating agencies, specifically for MICLA. I think they always give us an indication as how we're doing as a city. Part of it's due to the fact that they reevaluate how they conduct their evaluation of our MICLA program, and part of it is that the city continues to do progress in terms of how we're managing our finances. A central part of that, of course, is that we do these FSRs and provide quarterly updates to the council and to the public as to the state of the city. We report that overall revenues are tracking behind where we projected, or my staff could walk you through more specifically as to why. Part of it has to do that we received part of our property tax in advance of the fiscal year. We're seeing some slowdown in other revenues, an uptick in TOT, in part due to the fact that Airbnb is now required to facilitate the payment of TOT. So as a result of that, we caution your committee and the council to take a fairly conservative approach when it comes to expenditures throughout the fiscal year, and to pay specific mind to revenues that are general fund revenues that have been identified or are being discussed for siphoning off for other purposes. Every time, for example, there's a discussion now about the gas pipe franchise, and certainly the trash franchise, which it's not fully through your committee yet, but it will be heard by the policy committee later this week. Anytime that there's a decision to divert general fund dollars for specific purposes, it creates challenges to the general fund. So we are recommending that your committee in particular be specifically mindful of those specific programs as we move forward. On the expenditure side, we're already facing a modest shortfall in the context of a larger budget of about $15.73 million. That shortfall we're expecting to be absorbed primarily by the departments, and we'll continue to deal with the rest of it throughout the year. Our reserve fund is starting to decline in part due to litigation costs increasing beyond what was budgeted. To give you a sense of that, we adopted a budget of $68.45 for litigation costs due to some adjustments that were made as a result of specific cases that the total amount went to $96.95. So far, that account, over 80% of it has been spent. My office recently had an opportunity to sit down with the city attorney's office to get a gauge as to what pending litigation is for the current fiscal year. Well, we don't anticipate this entire amount, but if all cases that are currently on the queue would be resolved or there would be judgments on those cases in the current fiscal year, there would be an additional $185 million that we would be confronted. That's our worst case scenario based on sort of a preliminary evaluation of cases that are on the queue. Some of those cases will obviously get carried over to the following fiscal year. Some of them will be less than what we projected. Some of them will be slightly more. But we really wanted to get a sense of context in terms of how concerned we should be about the litigation that's currently being managed by either the city attorney's office or our office, and it's fairly sizable. So that sort of reaffirms our overall recommendation to take a very cautious approach as we proceed. We've all seen worse times, and certainly we're nowhere near where things used to be at, but we are concerned about the trends that we're seeing overall. So with that, as usual, Maria will walk us through the specifics, and I'll be happy to answer some broader questions if you have any.
Thank you.
So you've heard about the challenges that we are facing the current year. We'd also like to point out that we have updated the four-year budget outlook in this FSR to reflect the adopted budget. We are still projecting a budget gap of $84.6 million. We'd like to point out that there are some assumptions in this four-year outlook that are serve as caution for us as we proceed in the current fiscal year. This budget outlook excludes the impact from the recent labor agreements due to the timing of those agreements. It also assumes that $41.4 million of the city's comprehensive homeless strategy in 2016-17 was a one-time expenditure. It assumes that the size of the workforce will remain flat after 2016-17 and that there are no major increases in city services. And also noteworthy is that it excludes the recent settlement in the case of the Independent Living Center of Southern California versus the City of LA. So in addition to the challenges that we are experiencing this year, we also have to keep an eye for the next year. And of course, these items would have a potential impact on the four-year budget outlook. We talked about the reserve fund. Our total reserves at 5.18%. Including our budget stabilization fund, it increases our reserves at 6.86%. Because of the challenges, we would recommend limiting the use of the reserve fund to address only areas of great financial risk and liability to the city. Clearly, the funding that we have set aside in the unappropriated balance 2016-17 budget shortfall account is insufficient to address all our current needs. In fact, in this FSR, we are recommending that of the $20 million that is available in the UB, a $3 million appropriation be set aside for the Independent Living Center of Southern California Settlement Agreement implementation costs. So that reduces the amount available from $20 to $17 million. We brought forward a couple budget balancing solutions.
Sorry, just on that specific point, if we were to do that, what would the anticipated reserve percentage then be?
So the 5.18% that we've mentioned earlier already reflects
It assumes the
$3
$3
million.
million. Okay, thank you.
Actually, the $3 million is a separate item related to a HUD settlement that would impact the reserve fund.
So the UB is separate from the reserve fund, so it wouldn't be reflected in that.
Yes.
And you said you excluded the settlement from,
From the forecast. So when we project out next year and the following years, the settlement itself was not included because the city had not reached a settlement yet. And so,
I'm sorry, somebody is speaking in the audience. Please stop.
So the $20 million settlement, annual settlement for the next 10 years, 20 each years for the next 10 years, is not included in the forecast. Part of the reason that is because when the forecast was established, it was done prior to the settlement itself. The second reason is that there's no specific requirement on what source of funds are utilized for that to meet that expectation. So, for example, if the city were to receive additional funds for new construction, a permanent supportive housing that has been proposed in Triple H, a portion, if not all of the revenue that comes from that could be accounted for as part of the settlement. The settlement gives the city credit for the construction or rehabilitation of affordable housing units, of which obviously Triple H would help cover. So it's not assumed. The $3 million that's being proposed is for this current fiscal year implementation of that program, and the bulk of the implementation costs won't really become effective until the following fiscal year. So we're recommending that most of that be reflected first in the mayor's budget and ultimately what's proposed to your committee and the full council.
makes sense. Thank you.
And as far as budget balancing solutions, as mentioned before, we're recommending that city departments manage within their existing resources, and any surpluses generated may need to be used to offset citywide shortfalls. For the time being, we are also recommending that impacted city departments will need to absorb any compensation adjustments in the current year. As far as revenue, our report discusses 2015-16 year-end revenue and 2016-17 current year revenue. As far as last year's revenue, total receipts performed close to the revised plan, ending the year $1.1 million above the revised budget. However, as discussed earlier, property tax revenue finished $26.9 million above the revised plan, with early receipts of secured property tax in May. So the early receipts in revenue from last fiscal year is resulting into a property tax shortfall for our current fiscal year. As far as the current fiscal year, our revenue budget is $5.58 billion. Revenue through September is $52.9 million below plan receipts. And this is mainly due, of course, to our property tax being $34.9 million behind plan, our departmental license permit fees and fines being $19.3 million behind plan. So lower than plan reimbursements from special funds, library, rec and parks, as well as the early receipt of $5 million in election cost reimbursements in 15-16 are impacting this revenue category. We'd also like to caution that revenue is expected to be further reduced as a result of related cost overpayments made by special funds in 2015-16. This shortfall is attributed to a number of vacant positions. Also, our utility users tax is approximately $4.2 million behind plan. This is largely attributed to a revenue shortfall in the electric users tax revenue category of $6.6 million. And this is mostly driven by lower energy consumption due to cooler summer temperatures. And lastly, we have our parking fine revenue, which is $2.8 million behind plan. This is attributed to declining ticket issuances, attributed to staffing and equipment issues. As far as the $15.73 million expenditure shortfalls, the major departments with the significant shortfalls are police at $9.62 million, and this is due to sworn salaries, accumulated overtime shortfalls, and reversion of prior year funding of approximately $1.9 million. For general services, it's $2.45 million, and it's attributed to the shortfall in their parts account as in prior years. And for Office of Finance, it's $1.7 million. The deficit is attributed to the salaries as needed and the bank services fee accounts. Fire also is tracking a shortfall of $1.6 million in overtime sworn and field equipment expense accounts. The fire department has indicated that they will be absorbing that $1.6 million, and they will basically manage within their resources. As far as the police department, all but $1.9 million is expected to be absorbed internally. $1.9 million of that $9.6 million is due to reversions from the prior year, and we will be working with the department to identify a mechanism for offsetting that $1.9 million that's tied to critical programs that have already been approved. As far as additional recommendations in our report, we have a total of $120.63 million in budget adjustments, $4.5 million in appropriations within the unappropriated balance. Included in these UB transfers is $1.5 million for economic development initiatives, and there's $2.1 million from the Reserve for Liability Resolution, which is tied to the Ardone case. We have set $61.3 million in amygdala reauthorizations. And also there is a recommendation for a $3.03 million actually, reserve fund loan to pay the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department for ineligible costs associated with two projects funded with CDBG, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding, which were deemed ineligible. That loan is expected to be paid back in one case by a developer, and in the second case with the expected sale of a property. We'd also like to point out recommendation number 42A and B in our report. This is tied to pipeline franchise fee revenue relative to gas. The council previously took an action to rescind or to delete the word oil in a specific provision of the admin codes. So this action dedicated half of the gas pipeline franchise fee revenue of approximately $7.3 million to council discretionary funds. We would recommend that the council rescind that action in light of the current budget constraints. Alternatively, if the council choose to go forward with that change, we recommend that offsetting expenditures be identified at mid-year to offset that revenue reduction. We've also released an addendum to the FSR related to the Ardon case, which should also already be on record. The addendum was released on October 28th, and it provides additional recommendations regarding the Ardone settlement agreement. The city has received final approval of the settlement agreement. The addendum recommends the transfer of $45.8 million from the UB Reserve for Liability Resolution. We recommend that these funds be transferred into 2 escrow accounts to cover refund claims, attorney's fees, and other administrative expenses that are pending. And the city attorney is also authorized to process these payments. This action is in addition to the $2.1 million transfer to claims administrators and mobile phone carriers that's already included in the first FSR document. Including all these transactions, we're recommending transfers of $47.9 million that's tied to the Ardone settlement. And regarding the Ardone amendment, we'd also like to request a technical correction at the advice of the Controller's Office to this amendment. We want to clarify that recommendations 1, 2, and 3 are in reference to Fund 100. So we would request that the word Fund 100 be inserted before Department 59. And we've submitted the instruction to your city clerk. We're available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. General questions for the CAO members? Mr. Blumenfield?
Sure. Talk about the reserve, we're down to 5.18. What is the chance of dropping below that, or hitting that 5% mark in terms of how much more would we have to spend to get to that lower level?
It's probably about $11 million for the 0.2%. That's the amount that we are above the threshold.
That's precarious.
I mean, I think that's why, our top recommendation is that we not rely on the reserve fund to address any shortfalls that we confront throughout the year. There is a UB that's been set aside. We're protecting most of it because we know that there's going to be things surfacing. There's an agreement that's pending with UFLAC that will become effective this current fiscal year that may end up where the fire department may need some assistance. We also have the litigation that we talked about earlier. So the reserve fund is something that we recommend be the final resort as we confront shortfalls throughout.
Makes sense. And then sort of also on the 30,000-foot level, we're talking about the revenues and the property tax, how most of it was due to the early receipts. And that's good. I mean, in the sense that I guess it doesn't mean that the property taxes are going down at this point overall. The market has been going up, right? Is there any other trend that we should be looking at here? Is it just this timing issue, or is there a market issue we need to be looking at that may be changing our property tax receipts?
I mean, this is the second year this has happened. It happened the year before. Melissa could certainly walk you through it. We don't know if the same thing is going to happen next year. We have to go by what the traditional way in which we receive our receipts. But in terms of any other market trends?
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. We do not expect revenues to fall further with property tax. Our estimate for growth was about 6.5%, and that's what the county's assessor roll has come out for the city. What has saved us in the past is growth above what we had assumed in the budget, so we don't have that growth to help us out this year, but it is possible that we will again see early receipts that will help us out with the May shortfall that's currently in the plan.
So to put it in context, a 6.5 growth rate reflects the economy and the growth in property values and assessments, and so that's the good news.
Thank you.
Mr. Englander?
Yeah, you mentioned many of the labor agreements that weren't analyzed yet because of the date and then when they're coming in concurrently. Will we get another assessment prior to the next FSR? Will we find out the impact of those at some other time sooner?
Well,
collectively, the totality of those?
Well, we just released the MCIA, which is predominantly about 80-85% building and safety, which is an enterprise fund, so that the impact to the general fund will be fairly nominal. The UFLAC agreement is very close to being finalized, if within probably this week. And so we're anticipating there would be a budgetary impact. The best without sort of saying what it is, the best indicator of what it'll look like is probably mirror what we did with police, which resulted in a 4% increase this year. That would be a significant part of, take out a significant part of the UB. We work with the fire department to share and see what part of it they could absorb and what part of it will be pending.
Do we cost out, just taking a step back, sorry, do we cost out the overtime cost on the calculation for that as well? Because that then has a factor and goes up. And we always have a shortfall on overtimes.
I'm trying to recall if we do when we do the labor agreements. We do include the pension related costs. Right. The overtime costs are harder because they're variable, right? So they don't. Well, sort of. Yeah, they are. We could base it on patterns, but we do count. We know the pension costs are going to be triggered by the fact that there's any increases.
Right. Okay. And I had a quick question on some of the bank fees, and I noticed obviously it doesn't account for all of it, but with $2 million in additional cost in bank fees, do we charge? One thing is we're trying to make a move to get more people, more departments online and make it easier for our customers to make payments online, whether those are for filing planning documents, whether it's business taxes, whatever they can pay online to make it easier for people, whether it's businesses or residents, paying their dog license fees, whatever that might be, trying to get more and more folks online. And obviously there's a tremendous cost on that. I went recently to go pay my county taxes online and noticed that if you use a credit card, they charge you for it. I mean, if you wire it out of your account, there's no cost because the banks don't really have a cost on that. But if you use a credit card, there's obviously a cost, and the county passes that cost on to their customer. We don't always do that. We have sort of policies all over the map in various departments, but I know we're trying to get more online, and we're spending more money trying to get it so it's more customer service friendly. And some people, not all, but some people don't mind just because of the convenience. And maybe it has to do with them getting their points also, I don't know. But they don't mind paying the extra cost or fee, 1% or whatever that might be. Do we have any policies in place to look at that and address that? And looking at some of the costs, our bank fees just keep going up. And I know we always talk about this. But as we bring more departments online, which is my hope, and make it easier for people, it's certainly costing the other people who aren't using the system money. And so we should look at what the county does. Do we have a policy to do that?
I know it's something, like you said, we've talked about every year. I don't know if there's someone from the finance department who could talk about the status of this.
Todd Bowie, Office of Finance. And yes, there are some departments that do pass on the service fee related to merchant card purchases. There are various that don't. Right now, it's kind of been left to individual departments from kind of their own business perspective as to whether it was going to be a significant deterrent to people using their services or whether it was something that made a lot of sense for them to do cost recovery. In some of the smaller departments, in smaller amounts, they tend not to charge a service fee. Some of the bigger departments with larger amounts, they will. I think the one in question here, basically the deficit is attributable to building and safety specifically, and they currently do not charge a service fee. However, they have been working towards implementing one, and according to their most recent estimate, they believe they'll have one in place by January. This is for their development services.
Okay. Would you suggest that we have a citywide policy or leave it the way it is to sort of let the departments decide best based on their customers? And again, it's coming out of the general fund then and everybody's paying for it, but at the end of the day, it also means making things easier for all of our customers. So
I think it would merit having everyone taking a look at it again, and we can certainly look at which departments are or aren't, and have them identify why they may not be. And I think if it makes good business sense that they don't, then that should be considered.
would you want something, it's a little off topic, but it's very much on because we're paying the extra fees and we have this discussion often. Do you want a motion on that, or do you want to just report back on what the departments want to do? How do you want to move forward?
Glad to report back.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
And I think simply asking each department that is not charging such a fee to explain the reason, because sometimes it might just be out of inertia and not thinking about doing it a different way, despite the fact that we've talked about it for 4 years. So I think if they have a good reason, and there may be some, it may be, greater ability to collect, greater participation rates that will fall off if there's an added fee. But they should explain it, I think. And if they don't have a good reason, then we should impose it, for sure. So,
It could be a policy that the council then exempts.
yeah.
We should have a framework.
Yeah, a global policy, and then they make a case to be exempted from that policy.
Good idea.
Great. Anything else? Okay. Just a couple of things. We went kind of quickly past the pipeline franchise fee ordinance recommendations in number 42, and I'm not sure I fully understood the recommendation there. First, can you talk about how the proposed changes actually have an adverse impact on the general fund? And then do we need to actually make a recommendation as to one or the other of these, A or B, in this, or can we pass this on and let the council decide, or are they even mutually exclusive?
I think in this particular case, what we're pointing out is that we're not sure if there was an inadvertent attempt, if this was done by accident or this was actually a very specific objective to, by eliminating the word oil on the policy around the oil franchise, which means that the revenues that come from that franchise get split between the general fund and each council district. When there was a directive to remove the word oil, then that means that policy of splitting the revenues from franchises would be split for all franchises. 50% the general fund, 50% council district where it's coming from.
So that would be pipeline franchises, which is in this case the gas pipeline franchise.
So what we're raising is that if it was the council's intention to do exactly that, then we should be directed to find ways to deal with the shortfall that's going to create in the current fiscal year. If it wasn't the council's intention to do that, then we're recommending that the action be rescinded so that the word oil gets put back into the ordinance.
Okay, or
So there's an impact of over $5 million to the general fund in the current fiscal year.
okay,
I'm sorry, 7.3.
7.3 million in the current fiscal year.
That's correct.
So going forward, it would be significantly more.
Yes.
Okay.
And when was it taken out?
The ordinance has yet to be presented to council, but the instruction to the city attorney was to present an ordinance for council adoption or consideration that would remove the term oil from that section in the ad code.
So we're alerting you of that ordinance that's forthcoming, so that you're aware of the budgetary impact it has on the general fund, and can make a decision as to whether or not you want to consider that.
What's the context for the ordinance? I mean,
It was in the larger context of how to manage gas and oil. It was an instruction that was given in the last fiscal year when it was given on June 8th of 2016 as part of the creation of the Office of Petroleum and Natural Gas Administration.
Okay. Well, I would think on that one, probably our committee initiating an instruction to rescind a prior council instruction regarding an ordinance would probably be, I think, beyond our reach, because that should be a decision for the council as a whole to decide. But I think in order to help them make that decision, we should certainly begin the work of identifying the budgetary general fund impact and as you recommend in B, identifying the offsetting expenditure
Well, there's nothing
reductions to do so.
There's nothing to rescind
Well, the
because
city attorney-
we haven't adopted it yet.
But that was one of the two proposals in item 43, either to rescind the ordinance or to enact.
Well, it would be to resend the direction to the city attorney who's preparing the ordinance. So the city attorney has been instructed to prepare that amendment.
Yeah.
And so either you have that either-or option.
So procedurally, you're right, we could simply take this up at the time the ordinance comes back. But at that
We
time,
can amend the ordinance at that
we
time.
could amend the ordinance, we could do any one of a number of things. But in order for that to happen, I think it is important that we at least proceed now with the work of identifying the expenditure reductions that would be necessary if we don't change that, so that the council has eyes wide open if they enact this ordinance that it's going to cost over $7 million in the general fund.
We just need to raise it when the ordinance is
Yes.
coming so that we
Yeah.
know it doesn't.
Slip.
Okay. And then the reimbursement of the ARA grant fundings, that's a little unsettling to me. Why is it that, I mean, ARA has always been unsettling to me, and, you know, the fact that we had all this money and, you know, maybe didn't get the maximum benefit and jobs creation out of it. In this particular case, why is it that these projects were found to be ineligible for the grant funding? Why do we need to be reimbursing this money?
It was an issue of whether the project was project-ready or not. And we have received direct communication from the federal government requesting that reimbursement. And the city's ability to appeal that request has been exhausted. And so we've been informed by the Department of Economic Development that this is a payment that we must make. I don't know if the Economic Development Department.
So this
here.
is like 6 years ago, right?
Right.
We're now determining that the project that we got grant funded for 6 years ago was not shovel-ready?
Well, I think the issue is that the federal government, in conducting an audit of the expenditure of the ARA dollars, that you're correct was 6 years ago, has determined that that this project was not completed, and so
even now,
it's
hasn't
still
been.
not completed today. And so as a result, they have requested that we make this payment. As Maria mentioned, the objective that what the department shared with us is that the city will seek to get reimbursed by the new developer who will be engaged in that project from here on forward. But in the immediate term, that's why we're calling it a reserve fund loan, not an actual sort of permanent loss of revenue. In the meantime, we are required to make the payment to the federal government.
So would we expect that reserve fund loan to be repaid in what time frame?
So we expect a portion of the reserve fund loan. This is for two separate projects. One project around $2 million, the other project about $1 million. We expect that the amount of about $2 million to be repaid within the current fiscal year.
Okay.
And the $1 million would have to be based on the disposition of the actual property. If it gets sold, only after that will we get that those
Okay.
funds back.
So for the current projections, we're assuming that $1 million for the project that needs to be sold will not be realized in the current fiscal year,
That's
and
correct.
that's already assumed in our 5.18 reserve projection.
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to spend the $1 million that Mr. Blumenfield just identified, you know, already if that isn't already assumed. So that we've assumed that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think that was it for me. Anything else, members? Okay. Thank you all very much. Let's go ahead and bring up first DOT. And Mr. Blumenfield. You.
So we touched on the issue during the overview about the parking fine revenues being below projections this year, and wanted to understand why a little bit better about why that is. And I know that part of it is because traffic officers are pulled from parking enforcement, and wanted to both check, are we charging folks for that? This is because of new construction. Are we recouping some of that cost in some way, and then, or do we need to hire more parking enforcement? That's the classic example of the folks we don't want to be short-staffing.
Yeah, that is part of the equation as to why we're below. The on-duty officers, the divisional officers, similar to the police department, get pulled from area offices, whether it's Valley, Western, South, to fill in at an event or an unusual occurrence as they occur. Those officers are not reimbursed. The ones that are assigned to a Staples Center, to a Dodger game, to a construction project are reimbursed at the overtime rate. However, sometimes, for example, we had one Rams game where we had 15 to 20 no-shows for a variety of reasons, and then we had to pull from division to fill that vacancy because we obviously have to provide for the safety and security at the event. Those officers are not reimbursed because, again, it's like treating it as an unusual occurrence, and they have to be there for the safety of the attendees, excuse me, and the traffic that passes through there. So the majority of our special events and our construction projects and the traffic officers you see in the street are reimbursed.
Explain that to me. So when you say there's about 15 or 20 no-shows, what does that mean?
Well, we schedule the events off a volunteer overtime wheel, and if folks have a conflict or they can't find somebody to fill it, eventually they call out and they say they can't make it for either family illness or a variety of reasons, or just, they live in upper desert area. They don't want to drive all the way to downtown for a 4 or 5 hour assignment, so they call out. We do treat that as an issue as far as attendance, but it doesn't get our staffing to the location.
So it's not, so all the work that's being done with regard to that special event is being reimbursed. It's just that the revenue we're losing is because the folks that are being pulled aren't able to do their normal revenue work. Is that correct?
Not correct, no. Currently, we only charge for those that are on overtime rate. If I pull from a division, that person is not reimbursed by the vendor. We're looking at ways to do that. That has to do with the city attorney opinion, that if the officers are already working, you can't charge somebody for somebody that you already have there, which is similar to the issue with LAPD and the negotiations we're just now having with Rams and the USC as to how to reimburse them for their services, similar to that of the fire department. When they relocate their resources to a Rams game, they're using on-duty trucks and things inside.
Although that seems odd, though, if I get the rationale to some extent, but if you're pulling typically from my district, from the Valley, to go to a special event downtown, and you're not having the service there, you're still pulling, and you're still costing. So it seems like a pretty big loss for us to not be able to. We get a double whammy. We don't get reimbursed for the work that they're doing for the Rams or whomever, not to pick on the Rams, but I mean, whatever the special event is. And then we don't get the revenue from those guys who were writing tickets wherever they were.
Correct.
So that's a bad plan. So how do we change that?
Well, your last comment would be very helpful, is obviously to hire more. We're in the process of hiring. We have 85 vacancies right now. We're in the process of hiring traffic officers this month. We'll have about 40 come out of our part-time ranks to become full-time. So that'll help. What we need to do is we were working with the officers union to expand the overtime wheel. We now use it in reverse for those that don't volunteer. They're now ordered to come in, which is contrary to the way the wheel was established, and so the union is obviously not happy about that. But we are calling people in and trying to get more people to show. We have approximately about, out of the 585, we have about 400 that can actually do traffic control work. Others have medical disabilities or other reasons why they can't do it, and we need to increase that pool of people that can do the traffic control work.
So we increase the pool. I mean, I understand the reservations about not wanting to pull people when they're not volunteering for overtime. So increase the pool of folks. That seems like it's a no-brainer financially because they're more than covering their own costs, right? For each
Generally,
person.
they do, yes.
And then the second is, you mentioned the city attorney opinion. Is there a different way that we could structure this so that we don't run into that problem from a legal perspective? And this may be a question for the city attorney.
Right, our city attorney, Michael Daigle, we're talking with him about this, and it became an issue during the discussion with the other venues that, again, if they're already being paid on duty to be there for an emergency, and we declare an emergency in the sense of we need more officers to direct traffic at an event, we shouldn't be billing for their services, where it's actually, for a vendor, it's actually cheaper to pay us overtime than it is to pay the roll-up rate on a officer on straight time because of the benefits and things that roll it up the price of the officer. And so they're only interested, and most of the venues have a per dollar amount. For example, $42 is what we charge the Dodgers for our officers. What I'm pushing for is wherever we take that person from, $42 an hour should come from the Dodgers. If they ordered 20 officers, they got them. Where we took them from is our business and our management.
Right.
But that's what we're working through right now.
And that's a legal issue, you're saying?
Correct. There is, like I said, I don't know, they don't have a written opinion, but there's been feedback that is not necessarily allowed because they're being paid to be here anyway. If there was a earthquake, for example, we would, well, that's a bad example because there's no venue for that. I mean, there's no sponsor for that. But if we took somebody and put them at an event that's being paid, and this person's already being paid as part of our normal services, they have issue with that.
I get that. I'd love to drill down on that a little bit more and figure out if the legal issue is coming from city code or if it's coming from some sort of constitutional principle or other that we have no control over. Because if it is a city code issue, that's something we can more directly impact.
Correct.
But maybe that's for the city attorney. Thank you.
Okay. Anything for DOT, Mr. Ender? The CAO mentioned that fines were down due to staffing and equipment issues. You mentioned the staffing issues, and I think this was that discussion. What would be the equipment issues?
We have our vendor provides the handheld written ticket writing devices, and as part of our commitment to be more transparent with the violator, we've required that they take more photographs, which has caused memory issues, which has caused, because it's basically a 3G device, it's an old telephone technology. So we're in discussions with our vendor to upgrade that, excuse me, to 4 or 5G, so the data can get back and forth. Currently what happens is it locks up the device, which means either the citation that was being issued doesn't get issued, or it's hard for them to start another one if they're in a scenario where they're trying to issue multiple red zone tickets for a location. So it delays the officer's actions, and as you know, oftentimes we have the rule that if the violator returns before the citation is written, they get a pass. And so the delay creates the fact that more people come back when they see the officer and we don't get the citation written. Again, we're not trying to beat them to the race, but the idea is we're trying to be fair. And so if they come back, we say, okay, we move on to the next one.
And what's your anticipated resolution?
They indicated today, I spoke to them today knowing I was coming here, they said that they are trying a new software in our central division, and if that works out well, they'll distribute it out to the other divisions in the next coming weeks. So we're hopeful by the end of November we'll have a solution or a direction.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Anything else for DOT, members? No. All right, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and bring up the city attorney next. City Attorney's Office. Mr. Blumenfield, City Attorney's Office.
Yeah, thank you. We touched on this with the CAO's office, but I wanted to drill down a little bit more with you guys on the liability questions. It's a little scary that we've paid. In 3 months in the fiscal year, we've incurred $57 million, or 83% of the amount that we set aside. So I wanted to understand from you all the reasons for this and what we need to be doing to make sure that the trend doesn't kill us through the rest of the year.
So a couple things about that. Tom Peters, Chief of Civil Litigation. Last year, we faced a similar predicament, particularly with respect to the expected future payouts, which are estimated very conservatively, I think, for obvious purposes. The number that was given by the CAO is actually lower this year, looking forward for the rest of the fiscal.
Say that again?
The number, the 185 million, that's the worst-case scenario, Mr. Santana looked at that's a lower number this year than it was last year, just to illustrate that these things are, for I think obvious reasons, estimated very conservatively. Litigation waxes and wanes. You have the capacity in any given case of having a massive 20, 30, somebody got a $70 million verdict in a talcum powder case, not against the city, thankfully. So there's a lot of risk always, and we do our very, very best, and I think we've been very successful in managing those risks once the lawsuit is filed. What we are, with the assistance of Councilmember Krikorian and others, doing, I think, more aggressively in the city now is trying to manage risk before it even matures into a lawsuit. I think as the departments in our office cooperate more in risk management efforts, hopefully in coming years, those numbers will diminish. So we are trying to grapple with this problem, but obviously the goal is always to get it to zero, and that's, as a practical matter, never going to happen.
But if we kept on this current trajectory, we would have enough
That's
time.
true. If we realize the worst-case scenario, then we're going to have another 185 million. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I would just add that, we've been working, obviously, for good litigation results first. As Tom mentioned, we've been working very closely with Councilman Krikorian's office on risk management efforts. We are sitting regularly with the CAO's office to go over litigation. The numbers you've heard are sort of the entire universe of potential liability. They're not what we expect to turn out. And lastly, we do report to your council on a very regular basis, so we will, of course, be back with regular updates.
You do, and you've been doing more and more on the liability stuff, and that's certainly commendable and appreciated. And obviously, the numbers are scary that we look at.
But I think the risk management piece, which is something, again, that see Matt's here, we've really been working very hard to develop a full-fledged program. We've got a new risk manager on board in our office named Kelly Porter. We've been also working with the CAO's office as well. I think it's really a unique partnership, and all of us are very much expecting that that's going to have the result of impacting sort of the underlying causes of litigation, which is the key to managing our liability results. It's not the lawyering it at the back end. It's really the facts at the beginning, the policies and operations that we're working to change.
Probably most of these things are, 5, 7, what's the lag time on a typical case?
Well, that's sort of interesting. In Superior Court, it had stretched out to 3 years or so, and one of the reasons I think we're seeing more cases is that Superior Court, who had a budget problem several years ago, is no longer attenuating cases to 3 years. They're resolving more typically in 1 year. So cases that were in that pipeline are all being paid out now, as well as new cases that would have normally been paid up after 3 years. Federal court is usually within 1 year. We have something in excess of 1,000 lawsuits pending against the city at any given time.
But as you know, some of the, for example, wrongful imprisonment cases that we've dealt with in the past go back decades, some of the practices. So there is sort of a lag in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next is personnel. Hi. So my question on this was, the CAO mentioned that general fund has, some of the departmental positive balances now are due to their failure to fill budgeted positions. And the general fund has, in some cases, had an adverse impact because of the failure to fill special funded positions, which provide for an administrative reimbursement to the general fund. So I guess I have a kind of a really broad question, which is that we are finally at a point now where we're really looking at restoring services and starting to bring people back on board, and we've gotten the budget in good enough shape where we can do that now, and we have budgeted positions. What's the plan for accelerating that process? Because I don't want to continue to be in a situation where, departments are now, they used to blame managed hiring, and now they're going to blame delays in testing and, this and that, when we have budgeted positions ready to fill, ready to serve our constituents, and they're not getting filled. So what's the plan for accelerating this process? Are there structural challenges that you have within personnel that we need to address? We've had this discussion about staffing for personnel and getting you fully funded and fully staffed because of the ripple effect it has in other departments. We've had that discussion for several years too, but we're still seeming to take a lot longer to hire than seems like we should from the outside. So what do we need to do? What's the plan? What do we need to do?
Well, there's two parts to this. As far as establishing an eligible list to have candidates that are available for departments to make choices of, we've received a number of staff this last fiscal year, and we are at the point now where we are processing exam requests as we receive them. We're able to make up some ground, and we're starting to get that moving. It still takes us a month or two for us to be able to actually hold an exam because we have to do study of the position, make sure that we're giving the right test, gather our subject matter experts, and then we're processing it through. Part of what we're looking at is utilizing some online processes where we can have multiple sites where individuals can schedule themselves and come in and take the test at their leisure at different locations. We're also looking at the possibility of doing some remote testing where you could possibly do it from home. These are pilot programs that we're trying to get forward to see if that'll help us to get the exams done quicker and the list available more soon.
Great. And related to the exams, a lot of the hiring that we do are for positions that, are don't change a lot from year to year, and they're the same set of skills. Is there a way that we can expedite that exam preparation time by having, a lot of sort of off-the-shelf potential exams that you can use, mix up the questions, this and that, so that we don't have to redo it every time you get a request from a department?
We're also expanding our contract to include some what we call an item bank, which includes test questions that we could use to create exams that'll assist us. Also, we're asking departments to let us know that we can start the process before a list expires. We don't have to wait for a list to expire. That way they can overlap.
Great.
Again, that just takes us the effort to be able to have the staff to be able to produce that kind of work in that kind of a timeline.
Okay, great. Now, there was a second
Well,
part.
I just wanted to mention, in terms of the part of the process, is there's part one, which is the civil service, and then after the civil service list is established, there's a process that is designed to fit those individuals to particular positions around the city and departments. And so in a sense, we're playing catch-up. So we're filling during managed hiring position by position as a position became unfrozen. Well, for the last year and a half, the city has really been relearning how to do high production hiring. We're doing a high production of hiring now, at least for the consolidated departments. We are doing a lot, and two things. We're dealing with the tsunami, which is, as much as we hire, we're having people retire in significant numbers. And then the fact that these departments share civil service lists. So Department A finds the person that they want and offers the position. That person may have 3 or 4 or 5 offers in that same job class from multiple departments. And so we are dealing with that reality that there are, our candidates have multiple positions to choose from. They can choose the one that works best for them, and then we have to go to our second candidate. But we watch the vacancy rates really, really closely for, I'm speaking on behalf of the Consolidateds, and we are seeing that trend is down. So it's been a slow but gradual downward trend in the vacancy rates for the consolidated departments, and we expect that to continue. We are running slightly ahead of those retirements, so it's not as though it's spiking up. And DOT is a good example of that we're working really closely with them.
Okay. Great. Well, I don't need to get too much into the weeds on it. I just wanted to, because this is going to be a recurring discussion we're going to have probably with every FSR when we look at what the funded unfilled positions are. So if the trend is going in the right direction, I'm glad to hear that. We're going to want to keep watching that. So in fact, maybe that would be a good thing to include in our FSRs generally is, where are we with our overall vacancy rates of funded positions and, comparatively, so we can actually see that trend line.
Council member, in our FSR, we do include an employee level report. That would be attachment number 11. It is routine for our FSRs. We have a breakdown by department, positions authorized, regular positions, general fund, special funded positions, and hiring to date. We do update that on a regular basis.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is kind of like trend lines, so that we can see whether we're making progress over the course of time, especially because we're in a different era now than we were 5 years ago. And we're actually looking to fill positions and beef up the staff, which is a nice place to be. I just want to make sure that we're making progress in that area. So, okay, thank you very much. Anything else, members, for personnel? Okay. Anything else on the FSR? Okay, very good. Then we may have to somehow collectively read the amendments, because the CAO mentioned a few. I think the CLA had a recommendation. I had suggested that we adopt item B on 43 rather than, was it 43? Is 43 the one on the pipeline franchise fee?
42.
42. Okay, so I would suggest that we adopt 42B rather than 42A. Were there other amendments that we need to read in?
We did have the technical correction that we referenced earlier to the addendum.
On the ARDON
The ARDON, the
funding?
fund
Okay.
number.
Yeah. And then also, let's see. Matt, is this contract cities?
Yes, Mr. Chair, CLA's office,
Yeah.
Roy Morales. In the 15-16 budget, there was some language authorizing the expenditure of the contract cities funding and independent cities funding that was inadvertently left out in the 16-17 budget.
Okay.
So we would like to add a footnote to the 2016-17 GCP budget to authorize the controller to expend funds allocated for the Contract Cities Association and the Independent Cities Association on dues, conferences, meetings, and travel. That way it's parallel to what was in 15-16.
Okay, very good. So does that quilt of amendments then make sense?
Mr. Chair, I also
Yes.
believe Councilmember Blumenfeld had requested a report back on from the Office of Finance regarding which departments were and were not charging fees back to the customers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so with those amendments, if there's no other objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve the FSR as amended. Okay, thank you very much. And that brings us then to our closed session items, 1 and 2. So thank you all very much. Just. All right, we have concluded the agenda items. If there's nothing else before the committee.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we need to read the actions for items number 1 and 2 into the record.
Okay.
On item number 1, the city attorney's recommendations were approved. And on item number 2, the recommendations in the city administrative officer report were approved.
All right. There being no other items before the committee, we are adjourned.